You don't have to do this.
People always say the same thing.
What do they say?
They say you don't have to do this.
You don't.
Okay. This is the best I can do. Go on.
I know you was crazy when I saw you sitting there. I knowed exactly what was in store for me.
Call it.
No. I ain't gonna call it.
Call it.
The coin don't have no say. It's just you.
I got here the same way the coin did.
The scene you just saw, when presented in the two different mediums, was inherently really different looking. And the idea of the differences between the mediums really fascinated me, and I wanted to compare the ways the book and the film of No Country for Old Men were able to tell the story using different means, but trying to achieve the same goal, basically. After being in many drama classes, I at first made the connection with a playwright that I'd heard a lot about and read a lot about, Bertolt Brecht. When I started reading No Country for Old Men, I was immediately reminded of the techniques Brecht usually uses, that he was known for, in trying to alienate the audience or the reader from his plays in order to kind of allow them to see the bigger picture. And I really thought this was similar to how McCarthy sometimes would use descriptions of the landscape and the episodic nature of the book, how we jump from person to person, we're never really able to get truly attached to one character. And this really reminded me of Brecht. So here we see the alienating effect, that's the German word, and here the distancing effect. It says, while the general use of these is called the V-effect, to discourage audience from identifying with character, and so losing detachment, the action must continually be strange, alien, remote, separate. To do this, the director must use any devices that preserve or establish this distancing. Now, the challenge would be to somehow incorporate this idea of Brecht being an influence on McCarthy and still make the theme of the paper the difference between the mediums and the way the mediums are able to function. And so in my first draft, I had a really hard time doing this, and this is just like the first couple paragraphs. And Brecht kind of seemed to be not well incorporated. He was on the outskirts just as kind of an afterthought. And Professor Anderson suggested that I instead make Brecht like in the first paragraph, introducing him there, and then from there I would be able to work under that idea that both mediums are trying to alienate the audience and the reader in different ways, but still using the same idea that the main goal of the piece, either one, film or book, is to make the reader step back and realize the whole picture and see why this country really is not a good place for anyone to be, especially Belle, someone who has good morals and is unable to necessarily understand the horrors of the modern age. As we can see here, I didn't presume that Cormac McCarthy would actually have anything to do with Brecht's actual ideas. And I pretty much was able to find no actual connection, which isn't surprising, but it's still a really interesting idea to think about, possibly, that this somehow influenced him, whether directly or indirectly. And because he uses a lot of his techniques, and although there was no actual research to be done, it was still easy to draw parallels, and I thought it was a really interesting angle. So here's my final draft thus far, and I basically have rearranged a few things, and here now I start with the idea of medium, and then in the next paragraph directly I start talking about Brecht and the fact that both mediums were able to accomplish the goal of alienating the audience or the reader, whether or not that was their goal. And basically the entire paper goes through and says how each goal was accomplished in both mediums. Brecht not necessarily being the focus of it, but definitely playing a role. And one of the most interesting connections I found, or thought, that I think we've talked about a lot in class is the fact that Brecht was known for not allowing his audiences to have any sort of catharsis at the end of his plays, and I think that that's kind of an important connection between McCarthy and Brecht, because this book especially ends very strangely, and although there's so many tragic events in the book, we're not really focused on that. We're kind of focused on how perplexed we are as to why the book would end with that dream. And that reminded me a lot of how Brecht would often end his plays on kind of a perplexing note as well. So this was a very interesting project, and Brecht has always been one of my favorites, and so it was really interesting to be able to connect the two. Thanks for watching.